Imagine this. Two of the world's, well, most formidable leaders, President Trump and President Putin, they're getting ready for a really high-stakes summit up in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just some courtesy call, right? It feels like a make-or-break moment for Ukraine, a nation that's been fighting for its very survival for, what, over 3 years now?
That's right, over 3 years.
So what exactly is on the table? What's this complex web of demands, hopes, and, frankly, deep mistrust they need to untangle?
Yeah, it's incredibly complex. We're talking about fundamentally different ideas about peace colliding, not just U.S. and Russia.
No, Ukraine and its European allies, they all want a seat at that table, or at least their voices heard.
Absolutely.
So our mission today, as always, is to cut through the noise, pull out the key insights from our sources so you can really grasp the core conflicts driving these negotiations. Let's dive in. Okay, so this planned meeting, Trump and Putin, Alaska, August 15th. It's not just another date on the calendar.
Not at all. Our sources are really emphasizing how significant this is. It's the first face-to-face between sitting U.S. and Russian presidents since June 2021.
Right. And the first time Trump and Putin themselves have met since 2019.
Exactly. So
Okay.
that gap alone tells you something. It signals a really serious, maybe intensified push for some kind of deal, a peace deal.
Okay, so let's look at Trump's vision first. What are the sources saying he wants?
Well, his stated goal, and this definitely raised some eyebrows, is brokering a peace deal involving some swapping of territories.
Swapping territories. What does that actually mean in practice?
That's where it gets interesting. His envoy, Steve Witkoff, has been in Moscow talking potential terms, and initially there was some confusion.
Yeah, I remember hearing conflicting reports.
Right. There was chatter about Putin maybe giving up claims to parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast, but that got clarified pretty quickly.
Okay, so what's the clarification?
It shifted to Putin being willing to, quote, freeze along the current front lines. But crucially, those front lines include territory Russia occupies in those regions.
So not giving it up, just freezing the lines where they are.
Precisely. And some sources view this, let's say, pragmatic approach from the U.S. side as being driven by, well, a desire for a peace prize for Trump.
A political win.
Possibly. And maybe also wanting to shift America's focus more towards the strategic competition with China. That's another angle being discussed.
Okay, so that's the U.S. angle, potentially.
Yeah.
What about Russia? What is Putin actually demanding here? Because from Ukraine's point of view, it sounds impossible.
Impossible is a good word. Non-negotiable might be another. The Kremlin has been remarkably consistent.
So what are the conditions?
Okay, first, Ukraine must formally cede the territories Russia currently occupies. That means Crimea, annexed back in 2014.
Right.
And the 4 regions Russia declared its own in 2022. Kherson, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Luhansk.
And Russia doesn't even fully control all of those areas, do they?
No, they don't. That's a key detail. They don't fully control them, yet they demand Ukraine pull its troops out from the parts Ukraine still holds within those regions.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Beyond territory, Russia insists Western nations stop sending weapons to Ukraine, and critically, that Ukraine is permanently barred from joining NATO.
Permanently barred. That's a huge demand.
It is. And some interpretations we're seeing in the sources view this whole package offer as territorial vindication disguised as diplomacy, basically trying to legitimize their gains through a supposed peace process.
And Ukraine's response. President Zelensky has been, well, pretty vocal.
Unwavering is the word I'd use. Zelensky has firmly, consistently rejected any territorial concessions. Full stop.
He had that quote, didn't he? Something about not gifting land.
Yes, Ukrainians will not gift their land to the occupier. And it's not just rhetoric, it's actually baked into their constitution.
Their constitution prohibits giving up land.
It prohibits ceding territory without a nationwide referendum. And you can imagine getting that passed right now. It's practically impossible.
So it's a legal block as well as a political one.
Exactly. And Zelensky keeps saying decisions without Ukraine are essentially stillborn decisions. They're unworkable. And European leaders, like Macron in France, they've backed this up. They say Ukraine's future can't be decided without the Ukrainians involved.
That makes sense. And this brings up a really critical point, doesn't it? The difference between just stopping the fighting, a ceasefire, and actual lasting peace.
Mm-hmm. That distinction is absolutely crucial.
Because Ukraine seems really hesitant about just a ceasefire.
They are, and it's what keeps their strategists, and probably Zelensky himself, awake at night. The big fear for Ukraine and its allies is that a temporary ceasefire just gives Russia a breather.
A pause to regroup.
Exactly, a strategic pause Time to rearm, reorganize their forces, fix their equipment, train new recruits, and then maybe a few years later launch what some call a round 2 invasion.
So the trust just isn't there.
Not at all. The overwhelming sentiment, you see this across multiple sources, is that no one trusts Russia to not reinvade if they get that chance to regroup. So a ceasefire without a bigger peace deal. It's not an ending. It's just hitting pause. And it leaves Ukraine incredibly vulnerable.
And that kind of instability, always looking over your shoulder for round 2, that must have massive economic consequences too. Rebuilding seems impossible under that shadow.
It's a nightmare scenario for reconstruction. Without the guarantee, the assurance of a stable, long-term peace agreement, the kind of massive investment Ukraine needs just won't flow in.
Investors get spooked.
Completely. They're inherently risk-averse. Why pour billions into rebuilding infrastructure if there's a significant chance it gets destroyed again in a few years? It creates this vicious cycle. No lasting peace means no major investment, and no investment means no real recovery. Ukraine needs, the numbers are staggering, potentially trillions eventually. That money won't appear if the risk is too high.
I've heard people bring up the Korean War as a comparison. A long-term ceasefire instead of a formal peace treaty.
Yes, that analogy comes up a lot.
But there was a really big difference there, wasn't there? Something about troops.
A huge difference. And it's vital. The Korean War ended with an armistice, a ceasefire, yes. But South Korea's incredible economic success story happened under the security umbrella of a continued large-scale presence of U.S. troops on the peninsula.
Ah. Right, the U.S. military presence was key.
Absolutely critical. And that piece is often glossed over when people make the comparison. So it raises a really tough question for Ukraine today. Does Europe have the political will, or even the military capacity, to provide that kind of substantial long-term security guarantee?
What are the sources saying about that? About Europe's willingness or ability?
The sense you get from the sources is skepticism. There seems to be little political willingness in many European capitals for that kind of open-ended, large-scale military commitment. And there are real military constraints, too. It's not just about wanting to. It's about being able to sustain it. So the ceasefire itself is one thing, but the guarantees that come with it and who provides them, that's the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. What about Russia's internal situation? Our sources seem, contradictory on their economy and military capacity.
They really do. It's one of the most interesting points of divergence in the analysis we've seen.
On one hand, some suggest all this military spending, ramping up the industrial complex, has actually been, quote, great for the Russian economy, like a wartime stimulus.
Right. You see that argument. Massive defense spending, creating jobs, boosting certain sectors, giving an appearance of resilience, maybe even a short-term boom in some areas. But then other sources paint a very different picture. A much more worrying long-term outlook for Russia. They claim the sanctions are biting, that the war industry is actually starting to wind down in some aspects because of shortages, specifically capital and labor shortages.
Running out of money and people.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Difficulty accessing components, skilled workers being drafted or leaving, investment drying up. And this, they argue, is leading to rising inflation that hits ordinary Russians. So it's not a simple contradiction, it's maybe a tension between short-term appearances and long-term structural problems.
So the war economy might be propping things up now.
But potentially, according to these sources, there's a kind of ticking clock. These capital and labor shortages, the inflation, they could eventually undermine Russia's whole ability to keep the war going at this scale. It suggests maybe Putin is playing a bit of a short game, hoping for a deal before those deeper cracks really start to show.
And Russia isn't operating in isolation, of course. There's the China factor.
Yeah.
How significant is Beijing's role in all this?
Hugely significant. China's position is a major piece of this whole geopolitical puzzle, and maybe sometimes understated. Beijing has stated quite clearly it would not accept a Russian loss in Ukraine.
Would not accept a Russian loss. What does that mean in practice?
Well, think about it. It potentially acts as a huge safety net for Russia, a powerful economic and political backstop. If Putin believes China will prevent a total collapse or defeat, it significantly complicates NATO's calculations about escalation.
Gives Putin more room to maneuver.
It could. More leeway, perhaps, to continue fighting, maybe hold out for better terms and negotiations, knowing that an existential military defeat is unlikely because China wouldn't allow it. It definitely changes the strategic calculus for the West.
Fascinating. Okay, beyond the big powers, what about the internal pressures on the main players? Let's circle back to Ukraine. We talked about Zelensky's firm stance, but sources hint at challenges beneath the surface.
Yes, absolutely. Despite the very strong, defiant official line, the sources do point to significant domestic pressures. There's undeniable war fatigue. That's just natural after more than 3 brutal years.
Understandable.
And we're seeing reports about a reliance on unwilling conscripts that inevitably affects morale, unit cohesion, effectiveness on the front lines.
And desertion, I saw a statistic mentioned.
Yeah, really sobering one. Desertion is reportedly a major source of losses. One source cited over 215,000 cases filed by June. 215,000. That's a huge number, reflecting the immense human cost and the internal strain.
Wow.
And adding to that, a recent Gallup poll suggested that most Ukrainians now favor a negotiated settlement over fighting indefinitely to regain all territory.
So not surrender, but maybe more openness to talks.
Exactly. It doesn't mean they're ready to accept Russia's terms, not at all. But it does add another layer of complexity for Zelensky when he's at the negotiating table, knowing the mood back home might be shifting.
Okay, and turning to the U.S. side, President Trump's motives. We mentioned the Peace Prize idea. Anything else driving his push?
Well, besides the potential political win of a peace prize, there's that strategic pivot we talked about, wanting to shift U.S. focus and resources towards competing with China. That seems to be a consistent theme.
But this approach, it worries some allies.
It certainly does. Our sources mention definite concerns among some allies about Trump's reliability, maybe about the terms he might push for. There are even suggestions or maybe fears that he might try to, quote, blackmail Ukraine, potentially threatening to cut aid if they don't accept his terms.
Sounds familiar.
It echoes for some a historical unease, a perception that past U.S. security assurances to Ukraine, like those given when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, didn't ultimately prove reliable when tested, so there's history there.
Right. So where does this leave Europe and the UK in this whole picture? Europe, as you said, seems mostly aligned with Ukraine on not giving up territory.
That's right. The EU nations and the UK, too, are pretty strongly aligned with Ukraine on rejecting territorial concessions to Russia. They've even put forward a kind of counter-proposal to the U.S. approach.
Oh, what does that involve?
Their emphasis is ceasefire first, before anything else. Then reciprocal territory exchange, implying both sides might need to adjust positions, but not unilateral concessions from Ukraine. And crucially, again, those robust, credible security guarantees for Ukraine.
Security guarantees are key for them.
Absolutely. As French President Macron put it, Europeans will also necessarily be part of the solution as their own security is at stake. For Europe, this isn't just about Ukraine's fate, it's about the security of the entire continent.
Now, the UK is interesting here. Under Prime Minister Starmer, sources suggest they're trying to play a specific role, maybe prove something post-Brexit.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic. The UK seems to be actively trying to demonstrate its continued great power status after leaving the EU. Part of that involves trying to bridge the gap between the US position and the European one, maybe even, as some sources suggest, trying to show up Europe a bit on the diplomatic front.
But do they have the capacity to back up that ambition?
That's the real question, and where the UK faces a dilemma. Starmer wants to show leadership, but the sources point to significant practical hurdles. The British military is described as depleted, partly due to Afghanistan, partly years of underfunding.
So proposals for things like peacekeeping forces.
Proposals like a 10,000-strong reassurance force are viewed by many experts cited in our sources as, frankly, unrealistic, especially when you consider the overall size of the British Army.
They couldn't sustain it alone.
Highly unlikely. Any such force would almost certainly depend heavily on U.S. support, air power, logistics, intelligence. That critical backstop, as one source calls it. And that U.S. backstop is seen as simply not available, or at least not reliably guaranteed for a UK-led initiative like this.
So it's more about political positioning than independent capability.
That's how some analysts seem to interpret it. A lot of ambition, a desire to be a key player, but constrained by practical military and resource limitations.
Which really brings us back to where we started, this incredible complexity. All these players, they have such different goals, different pressures back home, and fundamentally different ideas about what peace even means here.
It really underscores the multi-layered nature of this, doesn't it? This summit in Alaska, it's not just Trump and Putin talking. It's this whole nexus of clashing national interests, intense internal pressures within each country, that deep, deep historical mistrust we mentioned.
And even struggles for geopolitical status, like with the UK.
Exactly, all converging on this one issue. And it makes finding a path to a truly durable peace incredibly, incredibly difficult.
So for you listening, as you follow these events unfolding, what's the key takeaway here?
I think you now have a much clearer picture of these really fundamental, almost irreconcilable positions, especially around territory and security. Understanding why a lasting peace is so elusive requires seeing these different perspectives, these conflicting red lines, and the complex motivations driving each actor. It's not simple.
Definitely not simple. And as these leaders prepare to meet, maybe here's something to think about. What could a truly dignified peace actually look like for Ukraine? One that secures their future, their sovereignty, not just for a brief pause, but for the long term. And maybe more fundamentally, what kind of profound shifts in thinking, perhaps even painful sacrifices, might be needed from everyone involved, far beyond just lines on a map, to even begin to achieve something like that?